Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Emily Harle.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be talking about major donor giving, providing context to some recently published figures, and asking if there's anything charities can be doing to stimulate more giving by the country's wealthiest people. Now, the Charities Aid Foundation, or CAF, has recently published a report into major donor giving. It found that the UK's wealthiest 1% donated almost £8 billion to charitable causes in 2023. This represents about 0.4% of their investable assets. It also found that if this group were to increase their giving from 0.4 to 1% of their assets, an extra £12 billion would be raised for the sector.
We have two guests joining us for this discussion. First up is Charlotte Prothero, External Affairs Manager at the think tank Pro Bono Economics. Last summer, Pro Bono published two reports about major donor giving. The first explored the important role of wealth advisors in stimulating philanthropy, and the second looked at the upcoming transfer of wealth to the so-called generous generation. Hi, Charlotte.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Also with us is Mark Greer, Managing Director at the Charities Aid Foundation. A big portion of CAF's work involves managing the giving of high net worth individuals through donor advised funds, which is an alternative to a standalone charitable foundation, and long-term social investments. Hi, Mark.
Hi, great to be with you.
So CAF has recently published this fresh piece of research. To get us started on this topic, could you please give us the lowdown? What is new or changing in the world of major donor giving?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's changing is how important major donor giving is becoming to the charity sector in the UK in particular. Our wider research into UK giving trends shows that the number of people who are donating each year is on a pretty steady decline, but the average value of those donations is increasing. So whilst giving goes up, the number of people giving is going down. And our recent research into high net worth giving, as you highlighted just then, Lucinda, shows nearly £8 billion of giving from high net worth donors in 2023. But what that is showing us, though, is that the charity sector is increasingly reliant on that smaller portion of donors, but also that there are some cause areas within the charity sector that are better at engaging with that population than others, and a whole load that other charities can learn from that. So I think the importance of major donor giving is becoming more and more, and we see that trend continuing into the future.
I thought it was really interesting that you phrased it as better engaging, charitable cause areas that are better at engaging, rather than the preference of philanthropists to be giving to certain cause areas. First of all, could you tell us what those areas are and why it is that these charities are perhaps better at promoting themselves and the need for these people's money?
Yeah, so the most popular cause areas amongst high net worth givers are education and arts and culture, whereas across the general population, animal welfare is the most popular cause area. And so clearly those are really different causes. And one of the things we know as a sector is that the diversity of the issues that charities are addressing is absolutely enormous, and quite often we get lumped in as the charity sector, forgetting that it's everything from animal welfare to opera houses and everything in between. But yeah, engagement I think is really key, and there are some cause areas that are better suited to and easier for those charities to engage with major donors. So, for example, education. We work a lot in the States as well as the UK, and we have a dual qualified donor advised fund within CAF that helps Americans here to give to causes both here and in the US. And so we see a lot of the American educational institutions, particularly the universities, but the school sector as well. They clearly have a decades-long tradition of philanthropy being a big part of their funding mix. But actually what they do is from the day you start studying at an American university, the fundraising starts from day one of your undergraduate degree and keeps going through the whole of the rest of your life. And it is about that engagement. It's about how they have built a culture of giving. And clearly, once you've got some momentum there, it's a lot easier in the education world in particular, because the pitch becomes around you benefited from the philanthropy of previous generations when you studied at our institution, and in the way that they supported you, you should support future generations as well. And they are very good at doing their research of finding potential donors, but also playing the long game, not jumping straight in with a pitch for £1 million donation, but playing that game of engagement and really working long-term relationships with donors. And so I think that that's a really, really important part of major donor giving. And that's not to say that sectors that struggle with major donor giving can just overnight flick a switch and easily become good at it. There clearly are some parts of the sector, some cause areas that are better suited to that style of fundraising. But I think it's certainly an important thing for people to be aware of as they consider their own strategies for funding.
That's really interesting hearing about how there's that sort of culture of giving in the education sector in particular. I would be keen to hear a bit more about how those cause areas that maybe don't necessarily lend themselves to this style of fundraising. Firstly, can you talk me through what sectors these could be? And if a charity in one of these sectors that typically struggles with major donor giving, how can they promote their cause to high net worth individuals?
The key thing with reaching high net worth individuals is firstly to start from a positive place. There will be people out there who have significant means to give and want to support your cause. So I think it's really important not to look at the kind of glitzier end of the cause areas within our sector and think, well, they're just always going to monopolize major donor giving, because ultimately this is about people. And particularly with high net worth individuals as major donors, it's not like you've got to pitch your cause to a corporation to fit in with their strategy, or to make formalized grant applications to a foundation. It's about people. And what I always say is, if you are a charity and perhaps you're in a cause area that isn't traditionally so strong with major donors, or even just if you're a charity that wants to expand its work with major donors, where you've got to start is remembering donors are people. And so they are motivated by sometimes the values that they grew up with and had instilled in them as part of their upbringing, sometimes by things that have happened to them in their lives. A lot of giving to both medical research, but also hospitals and actual medical care is motivated by either direct personal experience or close family experience. And so it's about building up a picture of who might be motivated to give to your cause. And there will be people out there who are. But then it's about finding them, which is often the difficult bit. Again, how do you get connections with people? Well, you go through other people. You use the networks that you've got. So it might be using your board, it might be a fundraising committee, it could even be your staff, or if you've got people who have had contact with your charity in the past and may have some sort of affinity, or maybe they've got some sort of connection to the area where you work. It's about finding those people through the contacts that you've already got. But then also it's about recognizing, though each donor is different, and so a lot of times it's easy to fall into the trap of saying, okay, we're going to target high net worth individuals, but it's not quite as simple as that. High net worth individuals who are young and entrepreneurial are pretty different people to high net worth people who are older and come from landed wealth, versus people who perhaps made their wealth themselves but 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they've been retired. And so you've got to really understand that you are targeting individuals rather than sort of homogenous groups.
And no one size fits all approach on that.
Yeah.
There is one group of people who invariably will be in contact with high net worth individuals, and that's wealth advisors. And Charlotte, I know that one of the pieces of research that Pro Bono Economics did last year was specifically around this group of people. So could you tell me what's going on with wealth advisors at the moment? Why are they so important in this area? And then perhaps later we can talk about how they could be doing more to make their clients think about philanthropic giving.
So there's an estimated extra 2.8 billion, which can be unlocked annually for charities, and this can be very much done through the financial sector as a key lever. There's currently 5.8 million people in Great Britain who have over 100,000 in financial assets, but only 8% of those people receive philanthropy advice. And one of the things that we really found is that simply by raising the topic of philanthropy within those financial advice discussions, financial planning then will see a kind of an increase of 40% of people increasing their donations and unlocking that extra money that I spoke about. And the FCA plays a really important part in that, because the FCA are the ones who basically mandate what it is that the financial advisors are asking their clients about. And so it feels like a really important thing that we should have philanthropy included within those discussions, or whether it's having more financial advisors take on philanthropy training.
So what's in it for the wealth advisors to be doing this training in philanthropy and even to be bringing it up as a topic of discussion with their clients?
I think one of the things that we found in particular with the next generation, so those who are under 35, is that this kind of younger generation are very socially minded, and it's something that they want from their financial advisors, but they're not hearing that offer of philanthropy within those discussions. And so by having the wealth advisor contribute that or integrate financial advice within their offering to their new younger clients, they can really kind of really stand out amongst like other offerers, and also stay ahead of policy trends and build long-term kind of client relationships with those younger individuals. The FCA are about offering what the consumer needs, and from our surveys we've done, it's very clear that this is something that people do want. So I think it's something that they should be including within their remit, and would be looking to the government to expand FCA's remit to include philanthropy as well.
And when we're talking about discussions around philanthropy that are happening between wealth advisors and their clients, what do those discussions actually look like? What kind of things should wealth advisors have that training on? Is it to do with being able to articulate the impact of their client's donation to a charity? Is it to do with being able to make the case for unrestricted funding as well and explain how that benefits charities? Like, what kind of things needs to be involved?
So having spoken to financial advisors before at some philanthropy conferences, I think it's just having it as a simple question. So they don't need to know the details of unrestricted funding or kind of what are the different potential sectors, because there are resources out there for financial advisors to use. They can go to organisations like CAF who have multiple resources that could help financial advisors. It's just simply about putting the question out there, asking it, and the client may say they're not interested in it, and if that's all it is, then that's fine, they can move on. But I think just with that asking the question, 40% more people do take up that offer, and we'll kind of see, you know, those charities who are really struggling at the moment having more help and support.
Mark, is that what you're seeing at CAF as well? Is it a case from your perspective of high net worth individuals wanting more information about philanthropic giving and perhaps financial advisors not having the necessary information that they need to have the confidence to relay on?
Yeah, I think this is a really clear trend now that, as Charlotte said, that there's a lot of pretty good research into the demand for advice around philanthropy from high net worth individuals, and that demand being stronger amongst younger generations, but still half of 35 to 54-year-olds say they want their advisors to be able to help with their philanthropy. We researched and polled independent financial advisors and showed that only 5% of them said they were very confident talking about philanthropy. And clearly, when you're a professional advisor, you don't really want to get onto territory where you don't feel comfortable, because your role there is to advise, is to be knowledgeable, is to help. I think that often wealthy people's financial affairs are usually quite complicated, and so they do have some quite technical things that they need to understand when it comes to philanthropy. So should they be giving shares, cash, other assets? If they're giving shares, which shares? The ones they've held for many years and have a big capital gain on them, or shares they've only held for a short period of time? So there are some quite complex questions about how much they can give and which assets they should give. And that clearly is the financial advisor's role to help them to do that. But often they also need to engage with the charity. Can that charity accept shares or property, or do they just want cash or even payroll? Some people give millions through payroll giving because of how their income is generated. So there's a really clear demand there, and would really agree with what Charlotte said in terms of the expectation on advisors is there, and so it's a good opportunity for them, but it's also a potential concern for them if they can't, and new generations inherit wealth and look to the family's advisors and don't find the sort of advice that they want. And so we are also really in support of the continuing professional development curriculum for wealth advisors, including aspects around philanthropy and charitable giving in the way that it does elsewhere in the world.
So thinking about our audience of this podcast, most of them will be working for charities. Thinking about this great wealth transfer, which you've both alluded to in your CAF report, Mark, you articulated a belief that in the next 25 years, there's going to be this transfer of wealth to the next generation, who are likely to become the greatest and most significant charitable donors in history. How can charities position themselves and start forming relationships, getting ahead of the curve, to make sure that they are in the offing for donations, for support from this next generation of philanthropists?
It's a big opportunity and a really exciting opportunity for the future. As Charlotte said, there is a generation that is more philanthropic and is about to inherit an enormous amount of wealth. It's really important, though, for charities to remember it's not necessarily really young people that will inherit from baby boomers. So if you're thinking about like people who are baby boomers and are in their 70s now, their children are in their 40s, 50s, right? And they're not 20-somethings. And some of that wealth will go 2-3 generations down, but it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking to target that demographic is about targeting people in their 20s. It's actually not really that. They're a little older than a lot of people assume. So that, I think, is the first thing I would say. But then I think the rest of it comes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is you can't really kind of have a kind of quick hit and run approach to this. This is about getting to know the donors, understanding the sort of impact they would like to create, understanding how they want to be pitched to, understanding the sort of relationship they want with you as a charity, and recognizing that will be really different for different people. Some people will be want to hands off. Some people will want to really have a lot of interaction with you and understand the impact of their giving. And so it is about finding those people, getting to understand them, and building that kind of long-term relationship with them that feels like a partnership of equals rather than a kind of quick strategy.
Absolutely. And that partnership is an idea that comes up again and again whenever I have conversations with people in the sector about high net worth donors and encouraging philanthropy. How can charities make sure that their existing donors feel that their donation is valued and that they're actively engaged in the charity's work, if that is the way that they want to be involved with the charity? Because as you said, every philanthropist is different.
The difficulty with this is because we're dealing with people, and sometimes people can be unpredictable. And so we work with many of our donor clients who are quite hands-off. They want to know the leadership of the charity. They want to understand that they're on it, they're running the organisation well, they're understanding the impact that they're creating, and they want some information about that, but are very, very trusting, I suppose. And then there are others who want to be invited to all the events and to be much closer. So I think it is about recognising that there will be a spectrum of people, and that your existing donors, that's just as true for them as it is for your prospective donors. But I think often existing donors are really encouraged when they can hear from their charity that actually the number of donors is growing, that other donors are joining them, because I think charities that do this really well can almost create a community of their donors. And when people see others joining that, that's a real validation of the giving that they've been doing, maybe for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, to see others kind of coming on board with that as well. And so I think it's really important to recognize that there can be a real opportunity with your existing donors just through the fact that others are joining the cause, others are getting behind it, and that the charity is growing its income, growing its impact, growing its operations, and the benefit that it provides to its beneficiaries.
I think it's also really helpful when we see charities tell stories through data as well. Charities at the moment are really amazing at giving case studies and examples of really great good that their services do. But a lot of the time now, we're seeing people want to see stuff in numbers or through data. So I think if charities can use some of their resources to look at the measurement of their work, see what kind of impact they've had, then they can really use that for funding and kind of proving their worth to philanthropists as well. We do quite a lot of that work at Pro Bono Economics through our kind of data first aid service. So you can be able to highlight what are the economic benefits. So I think if you're able to say, we spend X amount of money on delivering this service, but then it has long-term economic benefits, that can be really helpful to kind of make the case when speaking to not just philanthropists, but any kind of fundraising audience who are looking to reach out to.
I'd like to move on now to what the government can be doing to stimulate philanthropy and to get the figures up from that 0.4% of investable assets to 1% and generate an extra £12 billion for the sector. Charlotte, I'd appreciate your thoughts to start on that. You talked a little bit earlier about the role of the Financial Conduct Authority. Anything more widely in terms of what the government could be doing?
Yeah, we've actually seen kind of really positive narrative, I think, coming out of the government now, with Lucinda from DCMS announcing the place-based philanthropy strategy. So I think we are starting to see some really positive new initiatives come out of government. Also the civil society covenant as well, so working more in partnership with the charity sector as well. I think beyond including philanthropy within the financial advice conversations, I think it would be really helpful to look at match funding with governments as well. So encouraging match funding from government on projects where you're looking at a 10 million over kind of budget proposition. So going out to philanthropists and saying, if there's a cause or area that we're looking at, introducing match funding into different areas, whether that be child poverty, homelessness, because a lot of the missions that the Labour government have put out now do really align with a lot of what philanthropists' main goals are at the moment. So I think that's a very easy win, but it also highlights ways of the government better utilising money and being able to gain more capital for important social issues, and also impact investment opportunities as well. So being able to say, if you invest in this area, then we can double the impact. So I think those are kind of two other areas that would be really helpful as well.
And Mark, your recent report states very clearly that CAF is calling on the government to deliver a national strategy for philanthropy and charitable giving. I understand CAF is also developing that strategy. So what's going on?
Yeah, you're right. We've been calling, really since before the general election campaign started last year, we've been calling on the government with many sector partners as well to lead that strategy, a national strategy for philanthropy and charitable giving. And that's been a kind of cross-sector effort to call on government. And obviously we ended up with a Labour government after the election. And as Charlotte said, there's been various announcements since they've come into office. That call has been really around three things. Firstly, making use of match funding to target particular regions, and that's obviously starting to come through in the place-based strategy that Lisa and Andy announced. And then also what we've been talking about earlier around continuing professional development for financial advisors, and then lastly reviewing gift aid that goes unclaimed, making the system easier to use. It's not clear really what the strategy will finally end up on, but yeah, we along with other sector partners are talking with government about what that strategy should include, and we're looking forward to government bringing forward proposals in line with what the sector's been calling for since the beginning of the general election campaign.
We've covered some really interesting points and wide-ranging points over the course of this discussion, but just as a final question for you both, if a head of philanthropy from a charity, large or small, was listening to this discussion now, what would your one piece of advice be to them on how they can stimulate philanthropy over the next couple of years? Charlotte, could I start with you?
I really do think that a lot of philanthropists are looking locally. So I would encourage especially smaller charities to see who within their area are those individuals who really do care about the local area that they're in, and make that reach out and make that case for their organisation, but also go to those philanthropists with a very clear understanding of what they need from them, but also that they are in a position of expertise in what they do, and make that first reach out to them very clear that what they offer is really important, and by donating to them they're doing something really helpful, really great, and that they can see a long-term positive impact and local impact for their local community as well. So I think really like digging on seeing what are those philanthropists like keen interests, and also if they are a local or like have a connection to your charity and the area that they help serve.
Thanks. Mark, how about you? Either local level such as that or bigger picture, what would your one action point be for a philanthropy professional?
I think it's all about really knowing your audience and knowing your donors. So knowing them as individuals, what do they care about? What are they passionate about? What are their values? How do they want to be interacted with by your charity? Get to know that, get to know them. And then I think the results start to look after themselves, because it's based on trust, it's based on relationship, it's based on mutual understanding. So yeah, that would be my one bit of advice. Know the donors really, really well.
Brilliant. Mark, Charlotte, thank you both so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Mark and Charlotte, and that's it for this week. We'll be joined next week by Keith Wilson, Director of Income and Engagement at the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance. For now, from all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a lovely weekend or week ahead, depending on when you're listening. Our producer is Till Owen.